Right, any questions for the panel? Yes, Sarah Randall-Johnson.
Thank you. So, Sarah Randall-Johnson, I'm a county councillor, but I used to be leader of East Devon, which what Mark mentioned earlier. It has always been my desire that this is a place that people want to live in, and to achieve that, you need pump priming money. So the one thing I've heard today, which I'm not happy about, is to hear that this Healthier Towns initiative is going to finish in May. Cranbrook hasn't finished yet. We are still a long way to completing all of the outbuilding. So my question is to Danny McDonnell, what are you going to do to help us provide the funding for this to happen? Because if we don't, we're not really going to learn. Because if we don't pump prime, and health, in my role as health and adult care scrutiny chair at Devon County Council, there is a shortage of GPs. We do not already have the Healthier Community Hub. We need it, and your help would be grateful.
Thank you. I'd hoped to get away with it and sit down there, but thank you for calling me out.
There's a chair.
It's a very, very good question. Now, the reason why we've had 3 years of funding for 10 demonstrator sites. As you can imagine, for NHS England to centrally fund 10 places for how would we define a period of time? We can't be in the room the entire time. There's also debate as to how should NHS England be leading on something that's so fundamentally about built environment and in the wheelhouse of local authorities. I don't think it really matters who leads it, but I think as long as we've tried to lay the foundations for things to continue, and I know that a lot of the work is continuing. There will be an opportunity for support from the national team. The national team will carry on, and you will have a point of contact, and we can put you in touch with expertise and that kind of stuff. But also, we found out that we actually, it's very well NHS England be leading this from a national perspective, but we actually don't have many levers to pull on. I mean, developers aren't going to necessarily listen to the NHS. We've got a lot of soft sort of diplomacy that we can bring to the table, but actually fundamental levers we have none of in this space, apart from the NHS side of things and delivering health and care services. That's it. But what we have done is try and lay the foundations for things to continue. So I appreciate that funding coming to an end from the national body is never good, but we couldn't carry on indefinitely funding. We needed to get all of the learning from our sites and see how we could spread this to other places, and that has been our priority all along.
Thank you. And I think the other thing I would say is that it's okay, you can go. Thank you. Is that actually the baton is very much passed to the clinical commissioning groups, and on the 1st of April, the 2 clinical commissioning groups, New Devon and South Devon and Torbay CCG, merge into one. They are, I think they're the 4th largest CCG in the country, and increasingly taking a role in primary care commissioning. I don't know, Jenny, whether you just want to say very quickly a little bit about the work you're doing across Devon in terms of thinking about how we take this ethos into our planning.
Certainly one of the things we're doing is talking to other communities about, where housing developments are happening. Can we mapping the scale of development against where there are surgeries, where there are other services, in order that we can plan ahead earlier, because I think that is one of the things, is the NHS getting involved sooner in some of those debates and discussions. Yeah. So that's actually underway.
And it's levering in all of those sort of primary and secondary care budgets to think around these principles. Okay, can I take another question? Yep.
Hello, I'm Helen Hoyle, a senior lecturer in healthy built environments at UWE Bristol, and I have a background in landscape architecture, and I'm interested maybe in the broader Healthy Newtown programme. There's been a lot of mention of the role of green spaces in delivering health and well-being. My research looks at links between nature, green spaces and health and well-being. Have you actually really assessed, and in gaining learning, have you assessed within the Healthy Newtown context, the role of green spaces, what type of green spaces deliver, what sort of benefits? Have you done any of that so far? Thank you.
Anybody like to? Kenji.
Hello. No, we haven't. There you go. So, end of answer. I suppose what we're looking at actually is trying to understand the nature of how green spaces do interact with health. But looking at it in the round, in, I suppose, live conditions, it's extremely difficult, as I said earlier, to separate things out. And if we were to go to a park and look at the park and look at the people in the park and point at them and go, they look really healthy, the park is making them healthy, I think we'd probably be coming up with the wrong answer. So the research that we'll be doing, or that Simon will be doing, is actually looking at the overlay of health data and mapping it onto Exeter, at least to start off with, to be able to understand, if there is a park in a local area, then what impact is it having on its local populace? And then we'll be able to tell wider points about that park. It's because it's not going to be just the park, it's how you get to the park. Is the park visible? Looking at previous places I've worked, I know that you can have a park right next door, but if you can't see it, you're unlikely to go to it. So there's all these factors that are built in. Do you have ownership of your park? Do you feel like it's the sort of place that it's for you? And these are all real live issues. And how do you design parks, green spaces, etc., to be for everybody? And then there's the wider question about, is a grass verge actually a functional green space? Is it just a bit of green stuff that gets in the way and somebody's going to park on it? And so we need to look at it in I suppose in a quantitative way to understand what's going on, but it's got to be in a way where we understand what the issues really are. Is less more, and that sort of thing.
So an increasing evidence base around this. Mark, did you want to comment?
Yes, so I think just rolling back a bit from Cranbrook, what we do know from East Devon as a place is that 90% of people like living here. And when you ask them what do they like about living in East Devon, it's the access to the countryside, it's the quality of the environment, and it's their ability to enjoy more of an outdoor life. So I think anecdotally the evidence is there, but specifically we haven't mapped that onto Cranbrook as yet.
But it was very much, if I think about the original health impact assessment, that was very much part of it, wasn't it? And having the country park, and so it was there from the outset. Matt, did you have a question? I think you were next.
Yeah, Matt Evans from Active Devon. Question, I think, for Tanya and Stephen, really. Thanks for a really inspiring talk, and really interesting to learn about the very exciting and probably quite challenging times you've been through. I'd just like to know your answer to the question in 5 years' time. What would make a difference for the work you're doing in Cranbrook? Because I think if we put our chips on that particular roulette table, we're probably in not a bad place.
Fairer funding.
Yeah.
Go on, you start.
I was just going to say, I think what's going to make the biggest difference, and it might not be in 5 years' time, but it might be 15, is investing in the 0 to 3s and really supporting families who don't have much support now because there are no health visitors in the way that they were going into homes and things. Actually catching things then, and that will make a difference, but you're going to have to look at it long term. It's going to be a longitudinal thing, and you're going to be looking at those benefits when those children have been through Steve's school and come out the other end, and they are contributing to society rather than taking from it. But you need to start when they're tiny so that they have those experiences that develop that sense of core of being that they can carry with them through life so they can be successful. So I'm not talking about 5 years. 5 years, flourishing schools with good relationships with families, lots of children being healthy and active and eating well and knowing and understanding why it's important to be mentally healthy.
Not much more to add to that, but it is that fundamental working in partnership with their families, I think, is the key as well, and just making sure that we're not only getting it into the hearts and minds of our young people, but getting them to push it into the hearts and minds of their parents, uncles, aunties, grandparents, and just making sure that it's a real family approach and that the system is better funded.
I think one of the things that we've heard about in terms of this morning's presentations is the sort of mechanics of place, but also the stuff about people living in place and the importance of investing in people, investing in families, investing in relationships, all of that, really important. Another question, anybody? Gentleman at the back in the dark shirt.
Hi there, Andrew Gunther from Solvay Council. I was just interested to know perspectives from the development industry and the private sector developers that have been, who've got a key role to play. What's their engagement been in Healthy New Towns programme, and have they engaged positively with it, or have they tried to circumvent it?
Okay, Mark, would you like to answer that?
So we have an interesting dialogue with the consortium. I don't think they're as bad as some would like to paint them to be. but you have to understand that there is a dynamic which the construction industry has, which they answer to in terms of their shareholders and the other parties that have a legitimate stake from their side of things. But, you know, why did we go for this? I just want to get across, why did we actually go for this Healthy New Town designation? And it's not a criticism per se, but you know, we worked with the developers, we also worked with all the other stakeholders when we were trying to design what was required for the new town, and quite naturally GP surgery featured as one of those issues, certainly for the first phase of Cranbrook, and later on a health and wellbeing centre, which is something we're trying to work towards, along with sport and leisure facilities. But the developers, to be fair, you know, they built the GP surgery in the Young Hayes Centre, which was like the current community centre location for the town. And you know, I remember the meeting with Andy Wood, and he hopefully will correct me if I get any detail wrong, but we then met with the NHS, and they turned up and they said, why have you done this? And we said, because that was the spec that you told us you wanted, and that was what you said was the requirement for the first phase of the town. And the two people concerned looked at each other and said, well, we don't want it, we're not interested. And, you know, personally, I was horrified as the chief exec that we'd actually got this thing bloody well built. We'd got it ready to be kitted out, and the NHS, bless them, you know, weren't interested in actually, you know, doing anything with it in terms of, and I appreciate all the restructuring that goes on with the NHS, the CCG, the GPs, and all that sort of thing. So, you know, the first opportunity that we got to try and get a level of interest from the NHS and others into the practical issues we were facing, that's why we jumped at this opportunity. And I'm confident now that the learning about the other stakeholders being intimately involved through the whole phase of construction of a new town is a lesson well learnt.
Stuart Brock from Somerset County Council Public Health. We've seen from earlier that the population structure is very much, it's very lumpy, shall we say. It's got young families and lots of young children. Is it inevitable that a new town will have that population structure?
Ooh, Simon.
What we've seen is that pattern is what becomes apparent. So when the new town first sets out, you'll get a very young population, which typically stays fairly young over time. One forerunner of Cranbrook is Camborne, which is just outside Cambridge, which is similar distance to a similarly sized city. Very similar population at the outset, which is aged slightly, but still remains kind of fairly young. So I think we will see some shift in ageing as the town settles, but I think it will always be slightly younger, and partly on account of its location.
And also, I would just add, a lot of it is to do with the fact that, you know, the chairman of the county council alluded to the fact that something like 90% of the residents have moved from within Devon. Certainly from within East Devon, they've moved from what is arguably substandard housing in other towns within the district, because Cranbrook, you know, offers a better quality of life from some of the locales and environments that they've moved from.
Thank you. Another question, anyone? Yes?
This is a question for Danny. Sorry. I'm really interested in the publications that you've got coming out. And what I would like to know, because I think the learning is really key, is there going to be a publication regarding all the barriers or the patterns in terms of barriers that all the demonstrator sites show, and also those specific to each location? Sort of a warts and all publication, because I think it's, you know, to plan and to design and to say what people need to do is easier than actually saying, well, we recognise that there are these barriers and how people can possibly overcome those. Because I think when you try to do these things, it is really difficult. And I think an understanding and appreciation of all those barriers, I think, would be really helpful publication for everyone.
Thank you. Very good question. So inherent in the publication will be how demonstrator sites have gone about achieving things. And that, while the barriers will not be first and foremost in the publication, because if they were, then it would be a very dense publication of all of the challenges that might be faced. And also, obviously, there are sensitivities with certain things, you know, local partners where things haven't quite worked out that we wouldn't necessarily want to put on display. However, where things have worked and sites have navigated through a process, they've done it by doing certain things, and that will be the focus of the publication, really. But I appreciate understanding what the difficulties are is really helpful, and that's actually what we're hoping to have with the learning and implementation events, is we will have some of our site leads come along to these and be able to be in the room and say, look, this is really hard, we did it by doing this. So there will be space for it, but the publication isn't necessarily the best place for it.
And Harry, could I ask you whether that's something perhaps in terms of the broader learning, you know, the warts and all stuff, is something the King's Fund might be able to, might be interested in terms of publishing?
So it's certainly something that's been discussed, but I think we're also supporting with the learning, the ongoing learning, so we'll be feeding into that process as it goes along. But I think it is really important to reflect that it's not simple. none of this stuff is simple, and there's a lot of good learning. I think even in the publication there's a lot of good learning about some of the challenges and how sort of sites have really progressed through some of those and managed to do it well. So I think we will be capturing that.
That's lovely, thank you. And we're just about ready to... Yeah, one more question, okay. Oh, Danny!
I've got the mic.
Go on.
Selfish one for me at the moment, because I'm drafting them at the moment. If you could make specific policy changes in central government, what policy changes would you make to enable healthy placemaking?
Oh, let's run along the row. Anybody want to say anything? Let's go along. Mark, anything? You don't have to say anything if you don't want to.
Policy changes. Well, I think for me it would be a reflection of the need for the state to have a more interventionist role than perhaps it has had over the last 10 to 20 years. If it wants to look after its citizens, and if it wants to ensure that, you know, there's a healthy environment, the state has to have more of an input rather than, you know, predominantly the private sector-led model that we're trying to work to at the moment.
I think it's freedom to experiment and innovate. That's what I would flag up. Yeah, I think that's a really good one. But what I would say is that I think NHS England and Public Health England need to clarify their role with regards to prevention and public health, and that Healthy New Towns, I think, can be a part of that, but it's a broader question about what exactly is it that the NHS should be doing with regards to prevention.
Yeah, prevent duplication. Kenji?
I think it's a point, it comes from Simon's point, actually. The ability to innovate and experiment dies in planning. Planning is about creating certainty. I'm not dissing planners or whatever, but the system is inherently inflexible. And I get asked by developers things like, you know, what brick should I be using? Oh, I don't care. You know, honestly, you know, that's actually up to the person who's buying the house. But the person buying the house doesn't have the ability to go to the developer to say, actually, I want purple bricks. Well, you know, let them have purple bloody bricks. So in the end, there has to be built-in flexibility, and at the moment that review of planning, I think, is possibly looking in the wrong direction to enable that to happen.
Yeah, and it runs at odds to the sort of complex systems discussion that we've had around, you know, what you need to do to improve people's lifestyles. Jenny?
So I think integrated working from the start and actually wider thoughts about what that means. So it isn't, you know, health and social care, it's actually, you know, whole partners around the community, and I'd like to see more emphasis on the importance of that.
Thank you. Steve?
Just working more effectively with education to look at the barriers and the system that's currently very outcomes driven and very high stakes, and just looking at how do we build into the system more time and opportunity for mental health and well-being and healthy living.
Mine would be to take education out of politics and completely, so that we can get a system that's fit for purpose, that supports children to achieve all they need to achieve academically to have a successful life, but also looks after their mental health and well-being, because the system we have at the moment does not support children's mental health and well-being.
Very good. Matt?
Okay, I would probably say adopt a lead, don't lecture policy across everything to do with health and well-being in that sense. I think it's easy to tell people what they should be doing continuously, and it's easy to point out the deficiencies in their lifestyle and what they are or aren't doing with their children. But I think until you get down on a ground level and you make it a policy throughout everything to do with health and well-being, that message gets lost somewhere along the line, because people just don't want to hear another lecture about what they should and shouldn't be doing in society to make it better for themselves. So my message would be lead, don't lecture.
And it goes back to the, you know, the whole concept of well-being. People want health because it enables them to do the things that they love doing. So that's the motivator, and that's the thing about beautiful places, that it's getting people out doing things, socialising, and health is almost a byproduct of that.
Yeah, I think if the planning system could ask developers to prove that you can live in this development without a car and have a reasonable life, I think that would be good, as opposed to focusing on, you know, the shape of the roof or the colour of the brick.
Excellent. Right, can I ask you to say thank you to the panel?